At my daughter's wedding, the groom snapped fingers in my face and called me the waiter. I smiled because the man behind him had already gone pale. Recognition is louder than any microphone. I am 64 and I do not argue. I carry documents. When I open this envelope, the only word left in this hall will be shock. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Music kept pretending nothing had happened. A violin climbed the chandeliers and fell back in glitter. I set the tray down on a side table and looked at the porcelain cup. The surface quivered once like a small animal deciding whether to run. My tie was the same navy I wear for difficult days. My cufflinks caught a bead of light and let it go. The cream envelope in my breast pocket sat warm against the skin as if it had its own pulse. Tyler did not notice the orchestra stumble. He kept his smile at the volume of a billboard. He said, "You missed a spot, sir," and angled his glass to a circle that did not exist. I took a napkin and touched nothing. Behind him, his father, Conrad Grant, had stopped breathing in a way that looked polite from a distance and desperate up close. His pupils adjusted like a camera trying to find focus. He had heard my name once in a room where nobody laughs. Ava looked from Tyler to me to his parents. Her fingers found the edge of her bouquet and pressed the ribbon smooth. Her face is a careful place. It lifted for the photographer and curled at the corners when the florist praised the arch and then slipped when she saw the way Tyler's hand hovered in front of my face like a small command. I do not hold that moment against her. A daughter can be happy and still see what is wrong 2 beats too late. Servers drifted like swans. A child in a tiny suit chased a bubble until it broke on his sleeve and he stared at the wet spot as if a map had appeared there. Someone told a joke at the head table that died on the fork halfway to the mouth. A clink of glassware rang longer than it should have. The camera operator panned without knowing why and framed me in a crowd that had run out of things to say. Conrad turned slightly and said, "Mr. Cross," then he stopped. He knew the second half of the sentence and knew it would not help him. Elaine Grant watched her husband and tracked the direction of his fear. She measured my tie the way people measure a fault line with their eyes, and then smiled with too many teeth. She touched the sleeve of her son and whispered in a way that was meant to sound like relief. It sounded like a plan. Tyler still had a show to run. He lifted his glass toward me and said, "Our staff is very attentive tonight. I heard Ava draw air and keep it." I set the napkin down and allowed myself one small adjustment of the silver cufflink that had shifted when he snapped. The band resumed a safer melody. Someone at the back started a clap and then thought better of it. I said, "Enjoy the evening. It is already taken care of." My voice did not travel far. It did not need to. I watched it reach Conrad and strike something metal in his chest. He nodded once like a man answering a question that nobody had asked out loud. The way a person nods when he remembers the afternoon that saved his payroll and his name on the building. Tyler did not like the pause. He leaned closer as if proximity were ownership. He said, "Are you with the venue or the caterer?" I said, "I am with the bride." His laugh came out bright and brittle. He looked to his father for confirmation of something that no longer belonged to him. Conrad found a nearby chair with his hand and missed it by half an inch. A server approached with a silver coffee pot and asked if anyone would like a refill. I took the pot gently and tested the weight. I have poured fuel into quiet machines at altitude. This was not difficult. I filled my own cup and let the steam rise until it stopped shaking and became a simple silver thread. The band softened again. Somewhere a door exhaled. Ava took one step toward me and then stopped because all those eyes can be heavy. Her voice is steady when she chooses it. She said, "Dad, are you all right?" Tyler touched her arm as if to steer her away from a spill he had invented. He said, "The staff has it." She looked at him the way nurses look at monitors that beep for the wrong reasons. She sees the line and the noise around it and knows which one to trust. Conrad reached me with a cautious half-smile. Mr. Cross began, and the rest of the sentence faded like a dish carried into the kitchen. He swallowed. He said, "I believe we have met before." I said, "We have." He looked at my pocket and understood that the meeting could happen again for an audience. He said, "Perhaps later," and I said, "Perhaps now." He blinked. People who live by timing forget they do not own it. I lifted my cup and tasted the coffee. Still not good. I set it down and put my hand flat on the envelope through the jacket fabric. It is not a grand gesture. It is a switch you flip when a room needs a different kind of electricity. I did not move to the microphone. I did not ask for their attention. I let silence do its work. Tyler tried a smile before it was fully formed. He said, "Sir, if you are not with the staff, I think you might be in the wrong area." I looked at him with the same patience I use for stubborn machinery. I said, "This is my area." He said, "Whose guest are you then?" I said, "The bride's." He said, "Her father is right over there," and pointed directly at me. Ava's bouquet slipped a fraction. She caught it and stood faster than her heart. The camera operator had the sense to breathe through his nose. I could feel the room decide what it thought about suits that are not new and shoes that are polished rather than fashionable. I could feel the calculations and the stories they tell themselves about who pays and who pours. I have learned to let those stories finish so that the truth has room. I reached into the jacket and the fabric hushed a little. The envelope came out clean and heavy. The cream paper glowed softly under the chandelier as if it knew it was being watched. Elaine took a step and then stopped. She said, "Nathan, perhaps we should take this to a private room." She meant a room without witnesses. She meant a room where the story could be rewritten. I said I prefer honest acoustics. She glanced at Conrad for rescue and found only the look of a man standing at the edge of the pool he had built and realizing he could not swim. Tyler said, "If this is about a bill, we can handle it." He wanted the ground under his feet to be the ground he had rehearsed. I let him have his script long enough to hear the last line. Then I said, "This is not a bill. This is a courtesy." The envelope rested against my palm like a level tool. Inside it, the words that change temperature without heat, the names that make doors open, the acknowledgments that live beneath signatures. I have not opened it yet. I allowed Conrad one more chance to own the truth. He cleared his throat. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive the interruption." There was a tremor in his voice that did not belong to the microphones. He looked at me and nodded as if we had just agreed to tell the truth at the same time. He said, "I believe we owe our thanks to a man who needs no introduction." He looked like he wished that were true. I said, "I prefer none." The orchestra leader lifted his bow an inch and waited. The servers stopped mid-glide like choreography by accident. Someone's phone screen went dark. Ava's eyes were on me, and there was a question in them that had nothing to do with money. It was the question children ask without words. "Are you safe? Are you still the person who taught me not to bark when a door opens?" I gave her a nod that belonged to both of us. Then I set the envelope on the white linen nearest the head table and slid it with 2 fingers until it rested by the untouched champagne flute. The paper made a sound like a secret changing hands. I said, "Enjoy the evening. It is already taken care of." I did not say by whom. I did not say how. I did not say anything else at all. The orchestra softened until even the violin was thinking quietly. Glass knocked glass and chose silence instead. The camera drifted across faces that wanted to pretend. The cup on the side table had stopped trembling. The navy tie lay flat against the shirt. The silver cufflinks held the light and did not let it go. I stepped back 1 pace and let the hall hear its own breath. Dignity does not need volume. It needs proof. The envelope waited. The room did too. In the Air Force, I learned that the quietest systems carry the heaviest loads. You do not shout at altitude. You do not argue with wind. You watch the needles. You listen for the sound that should be there and the sound that should not. When something trembles, you make it steadier. When something rattles, you slow down and find the bolt. That training never left me. It followed me into civilian life the way a steady heartbeat follows a man up a long set of stairs. At home, my veteran cap hangs on the hook by the door. I touch the brim when I pass it as if checking a gauge. On the kitchen table, there is an engineering notebook with squared paper and coffee rings. The grid calms me. Boxes that wait for lines. Numbers that do not take offense. Ruth used to tease that I loved the notebook more than breakfast. She would slide a plate toward me and say, "Build it steady or do not build it." She was not talking about bridges or servers or cap tables. She was talking about our lives. Ruth and I did not make a fortune by accident. We made a plan when we had nothing but ordinary paychecks and a shared suspicion of noise. We lived smaller than we needed to. We wrote down where every dollar slept. We learned which tools lasted and which broke the first time you needed them. When an opportunity came, it did not arrive with fanfare. It came as a tired company with good bones in a bad year. We bought quietly through Easton Ridge and fixed what could be fixed. A new routing system here, a better contract there. The kind of work that rarely makes headlines and often saves jobs. Silence was never about shame. It was about design. I watched men get loud after raising money and then watched their promises run out of fuel mid-climb. I watched families change shape when cousins started counting what did not belong to them. I watched good people get dragged into rooms where the loudest person was the least prepared. I thought about Ava. I thought about how kindness can be mistaken for vacancy. I decided to be uninteresting on purpose. I kept my tie navy. My car is reliable. My calendar is clean of rooms where photographers wait for faces that mirror greed. I do not raise my voice. I raise documents. When Easton Ridge acquired Grant Freight 2 winters ago, the air was thin. Fuel prices had run wild. Credit had gone tight and hard like ice on a step. The company had routes that made sense and drivers who knew every dawn and ditch from here to the depot in the next state. It also had a balance sheet that wheezed. We could have cut deep and called it discipline. Instead, I asked for the org chart and a list of who had built the place with more than talk. Conrad sat across from me with a pen that would not stop clicking. He was proud and tired. He said the word family, and it did not sound like a tactic. It sounded like a porch that had seen many boots. I signed him to a consulting agreement on purpose. Not to parade him. Not to keep a hand on his shoulder in public. I wanted the men who had given 30 winters to know their names were not firewood. If the old owner stayed visible while the new systems came online, then those men might sleep. Those paychecks might clear. Their kids might open a refrigerator that did not argue. In a crunch, you do not rip out a heart to save a body. You teach the heart to beat with a new rhythm. Ruth liked that decision. She looked over the terms at the kitchen table and tapped one clause and then another. She said, "This reads like respect." I said, "It is also a leverage if someone starts playing games." She smiled the way she did when I tried to pretend I was less human than I am. She said, "You can hold a line without making a scene." Then she rested her hand on the notebook and asked what was next. I said, "We keep people working through a bad stretch. We hold our breath through the bend and exhale when the road straightens." After she died, I kept the notebook and the habit. I carry her photo in my wallet. It is the one where she is laughing into the wind and losing the argument with her hair. When I open the wallet, the paper edges click softly and the world gets simple. There is the face that believed in quiet things. There is a reminder that dignity is not a show. I close the wallet and the wall clock ticks once. The sound is crisp enough to cut through grief. I chose invisibility because it widens the margin between what is true and what people think they see. A plain suit buys you peace that a bright suit cannot. A modest car leaves you free to pick your own destination. A closed mouth allows you to hear where the room leaks. When loud people demand a spectacle, they do not know where to look when a paper slides across linen. It is not a trick. It is an adjustment of pressure. Ava grew up with that kind of house. We repaired a fence when it leaned. We fixed a leaking pipe before it could speak louder. When she brought home pay stubs from the hospital with the corners worn thin, I saw Ruth in her. The steady back. The eyes that measure the whole room before picking up the chart. We never sat her down to talk about wealth. We talked about work. We talked about the kind of love that does not put a price on another person's daylight. She understood. She did not ask for more than time and a table that kept its legs. People imagine that hiding is fear. For me, it was a boundary that protected my daughter from being seen as a prize instead of a person. I know the hunger that circles families when a signature changes the temperature of a room. I know what ambition does when it cannot find a handhold on merit. So I kept our name out of headlines. I let other names do the talking while we did the carrying. When help was needed, we wrote the check through Easton Ridge. When thanks were needed, we did not collect them. The day we closed on Grant Freight, I walked through the yard. Cold air, diesel ghosts. A man with a scarf tied high on his neck pointed to a truck and told me she does not like first gear in the morning. He had grease on his hands and a gentleness in his voice that you hear from people who know how to keep things alive. I asked his name. He said Earl, 31 years. I asked what would help. He said a new clutch and a promise. I wrote down both. Systems are just promises with bolts. You would be surprised what a simple promise does in a credit drought. You tell a team nobody is getting thrown overboard and they pull harder. You tell a dispatcher we are not closing the Oak County route and they make 3 calls and shave 10 minutes off a run. That winter we made it through because the quiet parts held, not because anyone shouted themselves taller. I have been in rooms where men flash numbers at each other until pieces of truth fall off like paint. I leave those rooms early. I prefer tables where the coffee is average and the decisions can survive morning light. If people consider that boring, I am fine with it. A man who has flown through sudden weather does not miss thunder when the work is to land the plane. The night after the wedding, I took my cap off the hook and set it on the table. I opened the notebook and wrote a line that Ruth would have approved. Build it steadily. I did not write the rest because I did not need to. I turned the page and drew a small box in the corner. In that box, I wrote 3 names that depend on me making the next move in the same way I have made every move. Ava, Earl. The team I have never met that still believes a paycheck is a promise that belongs to them once they have earned it. Silence is not erasure. It is an engineered choice. It is the distance between a moment that insults you and a moment that answers it with proof. It is a door you close so wind cannot enter the house. It is why I will hand a document across a table without a lecture. And it is why the people who mistake plain fabric for small lives always look surprised when the paper names the room they thought they owned. Tyler ordered a $1,000 Bordeaux on my tab and called it a family gesture. The rooftop breeze moved the napkins just enough to show the crest fold Elaine had practiced. The city was a patient grid below us, white linen, polished forks, a bottle sweating into a perfect ring on the tablecloth like it had been told to pose. I arrived 2 minutes late by design, not to make a point, to measure who could sit with their own thoughts. Tyler filled the silence with weather and the view and the story of a new restaurant he almost opened once. Elaine arranged her smile the way people arrange flowers to look unarranged. Conrad checked the horizon for exits. I touched the edge of my lapel where a small mic slept behind a stitched seam and told myself to breathe as if nothing could go wrong at this altitude. The server placed the Bordeaux with a nod that belonged to the label. Tyler said, "Let us not be shy," and then added that he hoped the venue would be billing me anyway. He poured for himself first to test the nose and said, "A family should share a good bottle." He did not ask if I drink. He did not ask if Ava would join. He raised his glass to the idea of us. I said thank you and lifted water instead. The server glanced at my hand the way staff do when they are keeping books that include grace. Elaine told a short story about how her family always made decisions around a table and how votes kept people honest. She said families thrive when votes are equal. She let the word equal sit like a centerpiece. I said equality is costly when only one side funds it. I smiled so the sentence would land like a courtesy. She studied me and pretended it was the view. She asked how I was enjoying retirement. I said I have never enjoyed it. The word never can sound like a door slamming. I made it sound like a chair being pulled out for someone I respect. Conrad said business people do not retire so much as change desks. He meant to sound friendly. It came out like a man who knows a storm by taste. We ordered lunch that we did not need. Tyler liked hearing his name leave the server's mouth and return with a nod. He asked for the special without asking what it was. He switched the subject to growth plans and how logistics was poised for a decade of consolidation if the right minds were at the table. He looked at me as if I were a piece of furniture that could be moved closer to the door when he wanted to change the air. The bottle left a new ring on the linen. The napkin kept its little crest. The city behaved like a map. Tyler said he could see a future path once the dust settled. He said inside the company there were roles that would open up now that the old owner had finally stopped confusing loyalty with inertia. He smiled at Conrad and said, "No offense." He did not look at me when he described departments that would report to him within 6 months. He said, "Freight needs a younger spine." He said he had already talked with a few people about reporting lines. He said the path again like it was a trail only he could see. Conrad nudged the base of his glass toward the center as if to stop it from sliding off the earth. Elaine asked how Ava felt about community work and events and whether she would be comfortable stepping into a public role with the grants. She said there was a foundation to modernize and a presence to maintain. She said the town looks to certain families when the ribbon needs cutting and the summer gala needs a chair. She filled the word presence with sugar. I heard the sound of a ledger. I asked how the first week of marriage was treating them. Tyler said busy in a way that meant performance. He said a wife is a partner and a partner deserves transparency. He breathed the word transparency as if it were a candle he had lit. Then he told a story about a friend who married into a family business and how helpful it was when everyone aligned their calendars and their accounts. He laughed and said nobody likes surprises. He watched me over the rim of his glass to see if my reflection would nod. The server set down bread and a small saucer of oil with a slice of lemon floating like an eye. A siren somewhere below rose and fell until it became wind again. I asked if they had everything they needed from the venue for the week. Elaine said the venue had been exceptional, though she thought the sound staff missed a cue during the first dance. She would be following up because details matter. She smiled toward me as if to ask whether I agreed that details cost money and money should be discussed. Tyler leaned in. He said the company had been held together by tradition and duct tape and that it was time to bring in people who understood scale. He said he already had a short list. He asked if I knew the regional manager in Oak County and said the man might be retiring sooner than he realizes. He said someone should be ready to rise. He did not know that in the world he was describing there was a simple gate with a simple sign. Easton Ridge decides. Conrad cleared his throat and asked about the fish. He thanked the server by name. He steadied his breath and returned his gaze to the horizon where buildings interrupt the sky with a kind of mercy. Elaine said she and Tyler had been discussing a family structure that would shield everyone from noise and taxes and strangers, and that she had seen it done beautifully. She explained that the structure works best with equal votes. She used the word equal again and waited to see whether I would spill my water or my thinking. I set my glass down and watched the wine legs trail in Tyler's bowl like faint red threads. I said that what structures do well is capture intent. Without the right intent, you build a fence around a mirror. Tyler laughed as if he had been waiting for me to say something he could applaud. He told the server to leave the bottle. He said we should celebrate being on the same side at last. He lifted his glass toward me in a toast that sounded like a test. I lifted water again. He noticed for the first time that I had not touched the wine, and he adjusted his smile by a millimeter. Elaine asked about Ava's schedule and whether a lighter rotation might be better for the family brand. She said people like to see the bride. I said people also like to see nurses in the ICU because the heart misbehaves on its own schedule. She said of course, and then changed course. She asked whether I planned to travel this quarter and whether my calendar allowed for a family retreat to talk governance. She placed the word governance like a pawn she was sure would become a queen. I kept the tone cordial and the air cool. I asked about their favorite restaurants and old family recipes and the names of teachers they remembered from grade school. People reveal how they hold power when they talk about people who had none over them. Tyler liked teachers who liked him back. Elaine liked headmasters who knew how to handle exceptions. Conrad liked a shop teacher who made him plain wood flat and start over when it was not. I said the shop teacher sounded like someone I would have hired. When the entrees arrived, Tyler announced he would be generous and pick up the tip. He said it loud enough to make sure the server could hear the word generous and the table could hear the word pick. He did not hear the lapel mic collect the sentence like a leaf. He cut into his steak and explained the value of speed. He said slow is for people who did not get in early. He said we will move quickly on roles and messaging and a new website. He asked me what I think of taglines that begin with Moving America. He did not ask who owns the trucks under the tagline. I let him talk. Appetite reveals itself when nobody says stop. I asked Conrad how the drivers were doing with the new routing. He said better than expected and that the winter had hurt but not broken them. He said some of the old hands were buying new boots. He tried to say he was grateful without saying he knew why he could be. He reached for the bread and chose the smallest piece. Elaine placed her hand on the linen the way a person claims a seat for later. She said we should get our calendars together and set up a proper family meeting. She said families thrive when votes are equal. She smiled as if the repetition would turn the sentence into law. I told the server the meal was excellent and thanked him by name. I said equality is costly when only one side funds it. I kept my voice calm so the words would not sound like a door closing. They would sound like a hallway. We stood, chairs side back into place. The bottle was empty except for a drop performing its last slow trick. Tyler said we should do this again soon and clapped my shoulder like a man confirming ownership of a jacket. Conrad offered his hand and held mine a second longer than is common. Elaine smiled a final time in the careful shape of a promise. I walked to the rail and looked out over a city that does not care who is right for long. The wind lifted and then settled. I touched the mic with one knuckle as if checking a pulse. Entitlement wears manners until the bill arrives. I left them at the table with their crest fold and their red threads and went to find a quiet elevator that would remember which floor opens onto work. When someone audits my life uninvited, I audit theirs with receipts. I called Serena Vaughn at 9 sharp and asked for a room with a door that closes like a verdict. She said, "Come now." By 10, I was looking at a conference table covered in manila folders, lined up like runway lights. A stainless stapler sat in the middle like a small machine that only tells the truth. The notary embosser waited near the edge with its mouth open, ready to bite paper into memory. Serena is the kind of lawyer who speaks like a checklist. She opened the first folder and slid it toward me. Intake summary. Time-stamped calls from Elaine to a boutique firm that sues over trusts and family governance. Names of associates. Call lengths. The pattern is what matters. The first call was the day after the wedding. The second call was after the rooftop lunch. The third call late at night, the kind of hour when ambition borrows courage from the dark. Serena tapped the dates with a quiet finger. Intent is loud even when the room is not. Devin Morales arrived without taking off his jacket. He lives at a pace that makes coffee look slow. He set down a hard case and clicked it open. He said paper trails get tired. That is when they trip. He laid out public filings and private breadcrumbs, mailing addresses that repeat too neatly, a shell contractor that bills for social media at a rate that makes more sense if what you are buying is discretion. Tyler's credit header showed 3 new lines opened within 30 days. One is a rewards card with a vanity metal face, one on an unsecured personal line. One store account is linked to a brand that sells appearance as if it were nutrition. We moved like a small orchestra, finding the same tempo. Serena ran the white glove down the county records. Devin ran his through the web that most people mistake for air. I worked the far edge of the table, reading as if each line could fit into a schematic. When a piece fit, I placed it on the right. When it did not, I placed it on the left. The right stack grew. The left stack did not learn. Serena said, if they go regulatory, we go procedural. She meant we will not shout. We will notarize. She held up a list of call logs from a PI shop licensed in our state that specializes in beneficial ownership investigations. The call started 2 weeks before the wedding. The final call lasted 42 minutes. She let the number sit on the table. She did not look at me to see what it did to my face. Devin slid over a printout of corporate service requests. Someone had asked for annual reports and officer changes from 3 entities that sit in the general neighborhood of Easton Ridge. The requests came through a third party that sells convenience to people who prefer not to be seen reaching. He pointed to the billing address. It traced back to a co-working suite where half the mail is ambition and the other half is denial. He slid another paper across. A recruiter email string where Tyler pitched himself to 2 vendors as a potential executive who could bring access and speed. The timing lined up with those new credit lines. People announce their plans whether they mean to or not. We took a break that lasted the length of a breath. The scanner hummed in the corner, feeding paper through its mouth like a clean animal. A report line item brightened on Serena's screen. Devin looked at it and said, "There it is." The firm Elaine called lists among its specialties disputes around family boards and equal vote structures. Their blog uses a certain set of phrases. Her emails use the same. People borrow language before they borrow money. I signed a limited authorization and slid it to the notary. The embosser pressed down and left a raised seal that felt like a small hill under my thumb. The sound it made reminded me of a lever seat. A stainless stapler thudded shut. Nothing shouts like paper that has been witnessed. Devin opened a new folder. Photographs printed on matte paper to kill glare. A lunch in the courtyard at a members club 3 days after the wedding. Elaine is with a woman from that firm. Tyler at a distance was more interested in his reflection in the glass than the conversation at the table. A receipt image from the club bar tagged to Elaine's member account. 2 neat signatures. A note in the margin in a tidy hand. Governance retreat. Serena reached for a marker and drew a thin line from that note to a date 2 weeks out. She wrote a schedule watch. One thing families forget when they hire hunters is that hunters leave tracks. Devin pointed to a courier slip. A hard copy package from the firm to Elaine's home signed by a house manager at 8:53 in the morning. He had a polite signature that looked practiced. People who sign for other people learn early that their names are small shields. They are also doors. I asked Serena to walk me through exposure that is real and exposure that is theater. She said the theater is loud but fragile. Real exposure comes wrapped in deadlines and certified mail. Nothing certified yet. She underscored yet twice. She asked me to confirm what we were willing to put on paper today. I told her what I tell aircraft in weather. We keep altitude. We do not burn through fuel to prove a point. She nodded and wrote it down as if it were a clause. Devin read aloud from a customer review posted under a pseudonym the day after the rooftop lunch. Someone is calling a company greedy for hiding in plain sight. The phrasing matched a caption Tyler had used on a photo 2 years ago, all cadence and no content. Devin said people carry their rhythm into disguise. It gives them away. He flagged the account and set a monitor. Not for retaliation, for pattern. We did not talk about numbers. We did not write contingency checks. We did not sketch settlements on napkins. That is not how I work. This was diagnostics. Identify the leak, measure the pressure, decide which valve moves and which stays shut. Serena slid a thin folder my way. Inside it is a printout of a vendor ledger for a floral company that worked the wedding. Small unpaid balance. A polite note from the bookkeeper. She said you can learn what a household values by the invoices it pays first. If a person leaves flowers hanging but pays a club bar in full, you know the stage matters more than the scent. She placed that folder on the left pile. Not a fit, not worth the time. She then produced a set of email headers that mattered. Elaine is reaching out to a friend of a friend at a magazine known for profiles with glossy teeth. A pitch idea. Family leadership in the new era. She drew a quiet line to the firm again. Picture, then paper, then pressure. It is an old sequence. It is also predictable. Devon rested 2 fingertips on a credit report and set another trip point. One retail card tied to a jeweler famous for financing celebrations at interest. The account opened the week before. Utilization high. The system flags when appetite surges faster than income. He leaned back and let the air settle around that truth. Hunger behaves the same across all cities. It looks elegant when it arrives. It leaves a mess. Serena closed the main folder and placed her hand flat on it. The law is a scalpel if you sharpen it before the surgery. We are sharpened. I told her we will not provoke. We will not flinch. We will memorialize. She wrote that on a yellow slip and stapled it to the inside cover as if it were a prescription. I called Ava from the hallway and kept my voice where comfort lives. I told her I was working and that she should eat if she had not. She said the unit was quiet for once and that quiet can be suspicious. I asked her to rest between alarms. She said she would try. We do not talk about strategy. We talk about stamina. Then we hang up before the air gets heavy. Back in the room, Devon shut his case, and Serena stacked the folders in a sequence that told a story to anyone who understood order. First the calls, then the credit, then the meetings, then they ask that pretend to be invitations. She handed me a thin pack to carry. Not everything. Just enough to remind me that facts have weight and that weight is useful in a hand that does not shake. We left at noon. The winter sun made the notary seal flash once through the folder like a quiet lighthouse. In the lobby, the elevator doors opened with the soft gasp of a machine that has learned how to serve without complaining. I felt the calm that arrives when the map gets clear. No accusations, no speeches, just the route. On the sidewalk, I paused and looked at the ordinary world. A man bought a sandwich. A woman balanced a child on her hip and her bag on the other side. A courier scanned a package with a beep that sounded like a small approval. I carried the folders to my car and set them on the passenger seat. The embosser mark pressed against the paper beneath it and left a faint circle. It is a small hill. It says the ground is real. I drove home with the radio off. The message was simple enough to carry without music. We do not meet appetite with applause. We meet it with records. We do not perform. We prepare. And when the time comes to lift a page and let it breathe in a room that thought it wanted noise, the only sound worth hearing will be the stainless thud of a stapler that knows where to bite. I will not buy my daughter a quiet life. I will engineer it. Some houses you protect with gates. Ours has always been held up by choices made when nobody is watching. That afternoon, I brewed tea the way Ruth taught me when the day needed gentler edges. Ava sat at the table with her stainless thermos from the ICU and warmed her hands around it like it was a small son she had earned. The slim blue folder lay between us. It did not look like much. Paper rarely does, until it is asked to carry more than ink. She had just come off a 12-hour shift and still carried the steadiness that hospitals stamp into people who refuse to panic. A line on her cheek from a mask, a rubber band on her wrist that had outlasted 3 different clipboards. She glanced at the folder and then at me and then at the window where the late light turned the neighbor's maple into a curtain. She said, "I do not need your fortune. I need clarity." Her voice was not loud. It had the same measured weight she uses when she tells a family the numbers will be watched through the night. I told her I understood. I told her the folder was not a rescue. It was a shape that would let the storm pass without taking the roof. She rotated the apartment key in her palm. The metal flashed and then calmed. She said I can love what we have and still want the locks to answer to me. I said locks are for doors, but also for conversations. This one opens only for the two of you." She nodded and traced the grain of the table with a finger. People think boundaries are fences meant to keep others out. Most of the time, they are lines on a map you draw so you do not lose yourself when the weather changes. We went through the pages slowly. No jargon. Serena had written it so a tired person could read it once and still be safe. What belongs to Ava before remains Ava after. What belongs to a marriage is chosen, not assumed. Debt cannot climb into her pockets without her hand on its shoulder. No one can sign her future for her. No one can add her name to a paper she has not seen. 2 signatures or no effect. 2 independent minds or no promise. I slid a pen over and let silence do the explaining. Ava lifted the thermos and took a careful sip. She watched the steam drift and disappear. She said, "I will hand this to him myself. I will say the words myself. Not because I want to make a scene, because my life is mine and I want him to hear it from me." Agency lives in small decisions that become habits. I felt Ruth move through the room then. Her old sentence stood between us. Build it steadily or do not build it. I said I would be downstairs. You do not need anyone at your shoulder for a conversation you already own. She smiled and shook her head. For a second she was 7 again and asking why bolts hold better when you do not over-tighten them. Then she opened the folder and read each line until her eyes had memorized what her hand would sign. She asked if this makes me a cold person. I said it makes you a warm person who knows where heat belongs. Love carried with open boundaries becomes care. Love carried without them becomes a debt you pay with your mornings. You do not owe your mornings to someone else's appetite. The elevator in her building groans when it starts and learns to be quiet by the 3rd floor. We rode it in silence to the lobby where the ficus has outlived 3 supers. Tyler was due in 15 minutes. Ava looked at her phone and then slipped it into her pocket like a tool she did not need for this particular task. She placed the apartment key in the blue dish by the mailboxes and then picked it up again and slid it into her pocket. The choice was not about metal. It was about answers. We went back upstairs and made the small decisions that keep a room honest. 2 chairs are pulled to an equal distance. The folder was placed where sunlight could touch it but not blind it. 2 glasses of water. A towel is ready for the false drama of a spill. I told her that when he arrives it will be tempting to explain too much. Let the paper speak. Let your sentence be a door. She nodded and breathed once the way I have seen nurses breathe before lifting someone who wants to fight the lift. There was a knock with confidence pressed into it. Ava opened the door and Tyler stepped in with a bouquet from the grocery store and a brightness that tried too hard. He kissed the air near her temple and said he had been thinking all day about how lucky he is. He saw me and adjusted halfway into a handshake that looked like a pose. I said I am here because afternoons are long when you have not slept. I took the chair near the window and became furniture. Tyler began with the rhythm of a man who always starts with the headline he likes best. He said weekends will be different from now on. He said he had already told his mother they would not be available for every committee. He said he wants transparency because transparency is love. He reached for Ava's hand. She did not pull away. She let him finish his line. She placed the slim blue folder on the table and set her thermos beside it as if it were part of the ritual. She said, "I need clarity." He blinked. The word clarity does not charm. It lands. She opened to the first page and described in simple sentences what the paper does. My name is mine. My debts are mine. My assets are mine. Anything we choose to share will be written with both of our hands. Anything that touches my license or my signature will do it in daylight with me in the room. There is no room for cousins or committees. He tried to laugh and then retired it. He said, "Come on, we do not need paperwork for love." He said, "Do you not trust me?" She said, "I trust myself and I want you to trust me too." He said, "This sounds like something your father wants." She said, "This is something I want." Her voice did not rise. She did not wave her hands. She did not apologize for the volume that was not there. He looked at me, and I looked past him to the glass where the city keeps its shadows. He said these things can be offensive to families. Ava said families become offensive to people when they ignore boundaries. He said we are on the same team. She said, "Then sign what protects both of us." He reached for the pages and read the first paragraph and then the second. He asked where this came from. She said a friend who understands how to build steadily. He tried to pivot. He asked if equal votes would make her feel better. He said we could do a family council with his parents and perhaps one of her aunts. He liked the sound of council. She said a council sounds like noise. My life is not up for a vote. I watched the world vote sink. Words that have been rehearsed often drown when they meet water that refuses to perform. He asked if this means she plans to leave. She said it means I plan to stay as myself. He said if I sign this, I look weak. She said if you sign this, you look like a man who understands what belongs to whom. He set the bouquet down a little too hard, and one carnation surrendered. He did not notice. She did, and straightened it because she straightens what can still stand. He read the signature page and put the pen down and then picked it up again. He asked if he could have time. She said yes. He asked if she would consider a version where he has some oversight for the sake of order. She said oversight is a word that stares down at a person as if they were a project. I am your wife, not a project. He tried a softer face and tried to place the request inside it. The face did not help the request. Ava looked at me and I let my attention remain on the window. This was not mine to steer. She placed the apartment key on her palm and held it out like a scale with only one weight on it. She said, "This is mine. I will keep it. That is all tonight." He opened his mouth to find a speech and found only breath. He put the pen to the page and then away again as if the page were hot. He said, "I will take the night." She said, "Take 2 nights. Make sure the answer belongs to you." He gathered what he had brought and left one stem on the table like a tip he had not intended to pay. The door closed with the polite click of a building that has learned how to behave. Ava stood still long enough to feel her feet. Then she picked up the folder and pressed it against her chest as if to quiet a drum. She breathed once. The elevator doors would close soon. But for a moment, the apartment held. She turned and set the key back in her pocket and looked at me with an expression Ruth used to wear after lifting something heavy the right way. Not relief. Alignment. Then she spoke in a voice I will hear when I am old and done counting. Love without boundaries becomes debt. I said, "Then take only what you can carry and what carries you." She smiled without show and reached for the thermos and the folder and the future. The elevator doors closed. She held the folder against her chest and breathed once. They sent questions to the SEC. I sent answers to my counsel. That is the whole shape of the morning. No speeches. A navy binder on my desk is labeled clarifications. A legal pad with 4 boxes to check. A lamp throws a clean cone of light over the pages so the rest of the room can disappear. Serena prefers precision to poetry. I do too. We built a response kit overnight because clarity eats rumor for breakfast. The first box identifies the inquiry. Informal. A staff attorney is asking about beneficial ownership thresholds and whether any filings should have been triggered by past activity. The second box gathers exhibits. Board approvals, scrubbed and stamped. Engagement letters with independent directors. Compliance memos from the last audit cycle. Third box narrative. 2 pages. Present tense. No adjectives that try to charm. Fourth box transmission. 1 sender, 1 recipient. Copy stored twice. I moved through the binder the way you move through a pre-flight. Not because I expected turbulence. Because the sky is not in charge of my preparation. The lamp hummed softly. The window held a pale band of dawn over the city that had not decided on a mood yet. Serena called as the kettle clicked. She said we will attach a cover letter that carries both kindness and spine. She read me the first 2 lines. Thank you for the outreach. We welcome the opportunity to clarify. I told her to add a sentence that lives in my bones. Our records are complete and available. Let me know where you would like us to begin. She said that the sentence is a door that opens both ways. That is the point. We rehearsed the sequence one more time. Clarifications binder scanned and Bates stamped. Exhibits labeled in the same font that has been boring and honest since before I learned it. We do not decorate compliance. We make it legible. Serena said if they push, we open the next drawer. If they pause, we keep our calendars clean. She asked how I was sleeping. I said with the lamp off and the work done. The email went out at 9. Outbox whoosh, the sound a small bird makes when it clears a short fence. I watched the progress bar because watching a thing leave can be part of the ritual that keeps your hands from doing more than necessary. Then I closed the laptop, and the room grew quiet enough to hear the desk settle. The phone rang. An old man's timing on the other end. Conrad said, "I did not know it was you." He said it like a confession and a favor he hoped I might grant in the same breath. I told him he was not meant to until his son snapped his fingers. There was a breath on the line that carried 10 kinds of regret. He said, I am out of rope with Tyler. He wants to run before he can stand still. He thinks speed fixes hunger. I let silence say I was listening. He said, I remember a winter when payroll looked like a roof with holes. I remember a wire that saved us and nobody needed a photograph of it. He did not say the name Easton Ridge. He did not need to. He said I should have told him what humility costs. I said I have learned humility is a debt people pay either early or late. It accrues interest when you try to ignore it. He asked if there was anything he could do that would make this simpler. He meant the pressure building in rooms where his family had decided money could be shaped by volume. I said we keep the process clean. He steps back from decisions he does not understand. He lets professionals do their jobs, and he chooses a smaller circle for a while. He said, I can ask. I cannot promise. I said, then ask, and then get out of the way of the answer. He thanked me without saying the word and ended the call like a man who knows the weight of doors. I returned to the binder and checked the last box. Transmission logged. Serena texted a thumbs up that looked out of place next to all the formalities. It still made sense. The point of clean paperwork is not to impress the mirror. It is to guide strangers through a forest without losing a shoe. I drafted a one-page internal note for Easton Ridge. Nothing dramatic. Keep records current across all subsidiaries. Pull the last 3 quarterly attestations. Confirm that the Chinese walls we do not brag about still hold. When you keep your house tidy, you do not fear visitors. By noon, the reply arrived from the staff attorney. Thank you. We have received your materials. If additional questions arise, we will be in touch. The email was short and exactly the size it should be. I forwarded it to Serena with a simple received and to our compliance head with the same words. There is a dignity and understatement when the work is real. I stood and stretched and let the blood remember my legs. The desk lamp kept its cone while the rest of the office softened into the kind of midday that makes men eat too fast. I ate a sandwich slowly, the kind Ruth used to call honest, because it did not try to be more than the ingredients. Then I walked the floor. The glass walls of the small conference rooms showed people doing quiet math and not selling it to anyone. That is my kind of music. In the afternoon, Conrad called again. The voice had steadier edges. He said I spoke to him. He believes he is owed a ladder. He does not see the ground yet. I said ladders are safe when the person climbing them knows who set them and why. Otherwise, you have a collection of rungs and a trip to the emergency room. He asked if I meant to embarrass him at the wedding. I said no. I meant to stand still. He said that was enough. He went quiet and then said he wished we had met a decade ago. I smiled where he could hear it and said that a decade ago I would have been less patient. I do not owe my younger self another swing at old pride. He laughed once, and it sounded like gravel leaving a tire. Then he said I will try to get him to stop making noise he cannot explain. I said, do it soon. He said, I know. At 3, I met with our compliance head in a room where the lights never glare. We went line by line through the binder and built a second kit in case anyone else decided to be curious. Backup contact names, copies of charters, the stub of a pen that had been signed 300 times and still made the same width line. We locked the kits in the cabinet and wrote the inventory number on a small card and filed that card where cards go to be remembered. As the light moved toward evening, I opened the window an inch to let the day out. The city did the thing it does where it gets prettier for a moment before it remembers traffic. Serena called and said, good work. I said the same to you. She said, you know this was the right tempo. I said yes. Frenzy breaks screws. The sequence keeps the wings on. I turned off the lamp and the cone disappeared. The office glass became a mirror. It showed a man whose suit fits because he does not tug at it. A binder sat neatly on the desk. A drawer clicked closed with the satisfaction of a question answered. Transparency on your terms beats exposure on theirs. That is the message I will write in my notebook tonight. Not because I need to be reminded, because repetition is a rail that keeps you from drifting when a chorus of other voices thinks louder must be smarter. On my way out, I stopped at the mailroom where the outbox light glowed like a small harbor. The clerk nodded and said, quiet day. I said the best kind. The elevator doors opened and offered me the same soft gasp as yesterday. I stepped in and watched the floor numbers count down like a pulse finding calm. Outside, the sky had turned the color of a polished coin. I walked to the car without checking my phone. The city at dusk reflects itself in glass until you cannot tell which way the light is traveling. That is fine. I know the route by feel. The binder rode in the passenger seat. The seatbelt clicked with a small, decisive sound. I drove home without news, the best kind. In the hallway, the desk lamp at home was a smaller cousin of the one at the office. I turned it on for a moment to set the binder down and then turned it off again. The room held its breath and then let it go. The day had not been dramatic. It had been correct. That is how you keep storms from getting invitations. We met 20 floors up where people trade mercy for signatures. The conference room held a polished table with granite veining like fault lines. Someone had centered a cream envelope where the centerpiece would be if this were a dinner. The conference mic waited with its red mute light glowing like a small warning at the edge of a map. The city hung outside the glass and pretended not to listen. Serena took the seat to my left. Ava sat to my right with the steadiness of a person who has held other people's fear and kept it from spilling. Across from us, Tyler adjusted his cuff the way you adjust a story before telling it. Elaine arranged her notes and a smile with the same care. Conrad folded his hands and studied the veining as if he could predict aftershocks from a memory. A storm somewhere worked on the sky. Thunder rolled far enough away to sound like furniture being moved on another floor. "We will keep this simple," I said. "No one needs a performance. We will speak once. Then we will stop and listen." Serena slid a thin folder to the center and tapped it once. Her voice is a measured instrument. She said the recent outreach has been addressed. There is nothing further to discuss on that front. She did not say the letters SEC. She did not need to. We had already answered the question that mattered. Elaine leaned forward with the kind of warmth that drifts when the room cools. She said this is about unity. Families thrive when they honor their shared responsibilities. Her eyes went to the envelope and then back to me as if checking whether the stage had all of its props. I said unity without accountability is a costume. It looks good until someone asks it to work. Tyler cleared his throat and tried to fill the space. He said what matters is a plan that keeps us aligned. He said equal voices make hard days easier. He said a family council would give us structure. He used the word us as if it had no edges. Ava set her palm flat on the table. She said, "Sign the postnup if family is what you want." She did not raise her voice. The sentence carried because it had work to do. Serena turned on the screen. One document, a clean timeline of calls and meetings, dates that tell their own story without adjectives. She did not read it. She let the silence do the reading. Then she played an audio snippet handed to Ava by a friend who had stood close at the wedding and heard the word waiter land. The voice on the recording belonged to a man trying to sound clever at a bar. Merry smart, not hard. It came out with the wet shine of a boast. It belonged on the floor. The room received it without moving. Tyler's jaw set a degree tighter. Elaine blinked once like a flash you try to ignore. "I do not fund appetites that eat their own," I said. "There is room in this family for dignity. There is no room for schemes that require other people's names to become stars." Conrad let out the kind of breath men save for winter. He said, "I hear you," and looked at his son without finishing the sentence that he wanted to be said. Serena placed a second folder beside the cream envelope. It contained nothing theatrical. A list of boundaries that make ordinary life possible. No speculation about assets that are not yours. No contact with third parties who present themselves as problem solvers in exchange for access. No attempts to treat Ava as a proxy for your plans. It was the kind of list a person reads twice and understands once. It did not ask for a confession. It asked for restraint. Tyler said this feels punitive. He looked at Elaine and then at me. He said we are in the same family. I said we are in the same room. That is all for now. He reached for the charm and could not find it. He reached for offense and found it too quickly. He said, "If you have so much to show, why not show it?" I touched the cream envelope. Because this is not a show, it is a boundary. The room took that sentence and held it. The red mute light at the edge of the mic stared like a patient eye. A plane moved across the window and drew a line that had nothing to do with us. Serena folded her hands. Ava did not move. You could feel the part of the floor where the granite veining wanted to be a river. Elaine tried again. She said we are all under the same roof whether we admit it or not. She said we would like to ensure a comfortable arrangement that honors every voice. She rested her fingers on her notes the way you touch a sleeping dog. The storm answered with a low murmur and then forgot us. I said comfort arrives when people stop pretending ownership of what they have not earned. We are offering clarity. Take it or refuse it. It will not be forced. Tyler reached for humor. He said, I have always admired your minimalist style. Few words, many implications. He was forgetting the part where fewer words mean the implications are not decorations. Ava met his gaze. She said, this is simple. You respect my boundaries. You respect my work. You stop making plans for a company that is not yours. You stop making plans for a life that is not yours. If you want a future with me, sign what protects me. Conrad shifted in his chair as if the granite had reminded him how long a person can sit in one position before something goes numb. He said, son, listen. There are nights when a man can either be right or still be married in the morning. The sentence tried a smile and then became a warning. Tyler studied the fault lines and said nothing. Serena slid a small card across to Elaine. On it, a single sentence written in neat print. If you continue third-party inquiries, we will respond through formal channels. It was plain as a fence and twice as calm. Elaine placed the card beside her notes as if it were a coaster. I do not enjoy these rooms. I do not fear them either. I looked at the envelope and thought of all the times in my life a piece of paper had done heavy lifting while louder objects failed. Then I looked at Ava. I said, you will deliver this boundary however you choose. She nodded. Her steady eyes did not blink. She said, he will either meet me where I stand or he will not. Those are the only two doors. Nothing in between is a door. I felt Ruth. Then the old command moving through a room that has forgotten what holds it together. Build it steadily or do not build it. The clouds pulled closer to the building. The light in the room changed by a shade you could only notice if you were paying attention. The mic stayed on mute. We let the quiet apply pressure. Tyler brushed an imaginary fleck from his sleeve. He said perhaps we are rushing. He said perhaps we could all step back and revisit with cooler heads. Serena smiled the way you smile when a student arrives at the answer later than the bell. She said cooling off is wise. Boundary papers do not spoil. We stood at the same time. Chairs moved with the small scrape that marks a decision. No one reached for a handshake that would pretend to be a truce. The cream envelope remained centered. I slid it a fraction toward Ava. She set her fingertips on the edge and then lifted her hand away. Not yet. The message was in the restraint. The glass door reflected us in layers as we moved. Faces stacked on faces in a building that keeps its own history in the shine. Thunder rolled faintly and then forgot our names. Tyler stared at his reflection as if waiting for it to speak. Elaine gathered her notes with one extra fold as if paper could give her more time. Conrad looked out of the window and let the city be the only honest thing he could think about. At the threshold, I spoke once more. This is not a quarrel. It is architecture. You want a house that stands. You place beams where they belong. If you remove them for comfort, the ceiling falls while you sleep. Ava picked up the slim folder from the table and held it to her side the way nurses carry what must not be dropped. She did not hurry. She did not look back. We stepped into the hall. The door sealed with a sound like a page closing on a chapter that is not yet finished. The storm went about its business somewhere else. I felt the day settle into its frame. Boundaries first. Mercy after the signatures. Deadlines do what fathers cannot. They force a choice. The 48 hours opened like a quiet corridor, and I told myself not to fill it with advice. I boiled water. I cleaned a counter that was already clean. I placed my phone face down and then face up again as if posture could keep it from ringing. Somewhere in the city, a clock slid its hands over a line and the room did not change. Sometimes the waiting is the work. Ava texted near midnight. Unit steady. I will sleep in the nap room between alarms. Do not worry. I read the words twice and put the phone away. When you raise a child to trust her own footing, the cost arrives later in the form of patience. You do not stand in front of her to show you are tall. You stand behind her and let the doorway be hers. I woke before the alarm to the kind of gray that teaches windows how to behave. The building across from mine kept its promise to be ordinary. On my walk, the dawn found the steel railings and drew a line of pale light along the top like a pencil choosing a margin. At the hospital, a volunteer wiped circles on the windows with the method of a person who has decided to do one thing well. I took the elevator up and down with no destination until the machine learned my weight and stopped noticing me. The ICU made its familiar sounds, The patient monitors did their patient work. Beep, pause, breath. A nurse laughed in a low tone that respected the sleeping. Ava appeared in the corridor with a paper cup and the kind of stillness that arrives after a night that did not argue. She said he called. I asked who. She said Conrad. He asked to see me. Today. Here. No escort. No script. I asked if she wanted me nearby. She said, I want you to be exactly where you are and I will be where I am. That is enough. I nodded and did not follow. I found a window on a landing step and watched clouds move like slow freight. My cup left a ring on the sill, and I left it there. Proof that I had waited without pacing. Conrad arrived with shoulders that knew the weather. He carried a hat he would not wear and a face that had decided to stop pretending it was younger. Ava met him in the cafeteria between shift changes, where the coffee tastes like effort and the eggs are honest about their limits. She set the blue folder on the chair beside her and did not open it. He sat with both hands around his own cup as if it might run. I did not hear the words in real time. I know them because Ava told me on a bench later, and because I know how truth sounds when it has given up on applause. He began with something that looked like an apology and landed closer to inventory. There was a time when every new route felt like a parade. There was a time when I would take the long road home just to drive past what we built. He lifted his eyes to the window where the dawn made a thin bracelet on the railing. He said I climbed a ladder of debt. He mistook it for a throne. He did not need a name. It belonged to the part of a man that loves speed more than ground. Ava listened without rewarding or punishing what she heard. It is a skill she learned in rooms where people play games with their breath. She said, I can love you and not love your choices. She did not pull the sentence back once it was out. It sat between them with the authority of a chair. Conrad nodded as if someone had finally measured the room in feet instead of wishes. He told her the first loan had been small and necessary, and the second had been heavy but manageable, and the third had felt like a friend and behaved like a stranger. He said, your father kept me on after the sale. He did not say to keep me visible. He said so the old hands would know they were not yesterday. He put a palm flat on the table and left it there like a man swearing on no book at all. A nurse passed with a tray and a smell of citrus cleaner followed in her wake and disappeared. The monitors kept their patient covenant. Beep, pause, breath. Ava folded her hands. She said there will be a paper to sign and you will not like it. That is fine. It is not for liking, it is for living. He took that in. He asked if Tyler would listen if he told him to slow down. She said you can try. He can learn from truth or he can learn from time. Truth is kinder. He told her a story I had never heard. A winter when a truck rolled onto its side near a fence and the driver crawled out on the quiet side of luck. He said we kept the man on full pay while his ribs argued with him and I slept a straight night for the first time that month. He said money is only noble when it lets you do the right thing that the account would otherwise not allow it. He stared at his hands. Somewhere above us, a doctor said the word stable, and somebody cried the way relief cries, and then stopped, because relief has work to do too. Ava asked him what he would change if he could walk backward. He said I would have retired my pride first. She asked him what he would keep. He said the route through Oak County at dawn. There is a bend where the fog lifts like a curtain and you see the lights of town waking up and you remember that some things open without your permission. He tried to laugh and found a cough instead. She told him about the post-nup again. Not the clauses. The point. My name is mine. My work is mine. My mornings are mine. Anything we share, we choose. He asked who taught you that. She said the person who taught me to carry other people without letting them live in my back. He did not ask which person. He looked toward the corridor as if he could hear my shoes not moving. He reached into his pocket and put a business card on the table and slid it toward her and then pulled it back like a fisherman who has realized the lake is not where he thought it was. He said I called a firm I should not have called. I thought it was a strategy. It was noise. I have stopped. He held up both hands with the fingers spread as if they could show empty air. He did not ask for credit. He asked to leave with his dignity sealed neatly inside his coat. Ava thanked him for saying the quiet parts in a room that belongs to the sick. She told him to go home and sleep. She told him that if he wants to be useful, he can tell his son to be a man who signs what protects a wife. Conrad put his hat on then and stood. He looked like a father leaving a recital where he finally heard the music, not because the song changed, because he took off the earplugs. They walked to the main doors together without touching. The hospital doors parted with their practiced politeness. Sunlight edged the floor tiles. They stood inside that border for a moment and did not pretend it was a stage. I joined Ava on a bench near the ambulance bay where you can smell rubber and winter at the same time. She handed me a fresh cup and said he told the story straight for once. No edits. He owned the parts that were his. He left the parts that are not. We watched a paramedic adjust a strap with one gloved hand and tuck a blanket with the other. Work done right without ceremony. I told her I was proud of how she had held the room. She said it is easier to carry on a conversation than to carry on a lie. She smiled with more eyes than mouth and rested her head on the back of the bench. And for a moment, there she was, 5 years old again next to me at a parade that went by too quickly. Then she stood and checked her watch, and the ICU reclaimed her. The day moved forward in the measured way a day does when no one insists on fireworks. I drove home the long way and passed the depot at the edge of town. A rig pulled out slowly as if remembering someone who taught it not to rush the first turn. At a stoplight, I looked at my own hands on the wheel and thought about angles. Truth will not repair yesterday. It will set the nose of the plane so the landing finds the runway instead of the grass. Back at the apartment, the ring from my cup had dried into a faint halo. I left it, not as neglect, as proof that waiting can leave a mark that is not a stain. Evening settled with the courtesy of a neighbor who knows your schedule. The 48 hours were not finished. Choices were ripening on their own time. Deadlines can force a door. They cannot walk a man through it. I sat with that thought until the room agreed. Then I turned off the lamp and let the dark make the shapes simple. Tomorrow would bring pens and paper and whatever courage a signature can borrow from morning light. At noon, the city held its breath. Ours was the only pen moving. The wall clock over the notary's desk stepped to 12 and made a sound like a small door locking. The room was bright and ordinary. Heavy paper, fresh blue ink. A notary seal is waiting with its mouth open. Ava sat beside me, calm as a winter lake. Serena faced us with the binder arranged so even a stranger could follow the lanes. The notary adjusted her glasses and placed the stamp within reach. Tyler walked in with Conrad and Elaine and tried to borrow posture from the furniture. He looked at the clock. He looked at the paper. He looked at Ava, the way a man looks at a distance he has never measured. Serena spoke once and only once. This is a signing to memorialize boundaries. There will be no speeches. She nodded to me. I slid a single document forward. The paper felt like it knew the weight it would carry. I said, this is not a rescue. It is a boundary. Ava spoke next and the room chose to listen. If you want a future with me, sign what protects me. Tyler looked at the notary stamp as if it could offer advice. He whispered, is this all you? I set my hand flat on the table. No, it is not. I turned to Ava. My voice stayed low because truth can be quiet when it is complete. Easton Ridge's controlling interest has been held for years inside a trust that carries your name. The Ava Ruth Cross Irrevocable Trust. I have been the trustee, that is all. You are the person whose consent matters. You decide whether the grants receive breathing room and on what conditions. Ava did not blink. Conrad closed his eyes for a beat that looked like prayer without the theater. Elaine said this is sudden. Serena said the structure predates every argument in this room. Then she placed the terms on the table like tools that fit the hand they were made for. First, all complaints and third-party inquiries are withdrawn in writing within 24 hours. Second, the postnuptial agreement is signed exactly as tendered with independent counsel for both sides. Third, there are no claims on the trust and no contact regarding its assets, not by you, not by any friend or firm you hide behind. Fourth, any communication about finances goes through counsel only. In return, Easton Ridge will extend Conrad's consulting engagement for a defined period and provide a limited bridge line to stabilize routes during that period. That is all. No numbers were offered. Timelines would be written in the lines that matter and nowhere else. Tyler stared at the heading of the trust and tried to find himself in the letters. He said her name is on the trust. He looked at me and then at Ava and then back at the seal like it might bite him if he made a wrong move. Elaine reached for the list and read the terms twice. She pressed a thumb against the paper as if testing its pulse. Conrad kept his hands folded and his eyes on the ink like a man who knows what signatures cost across a lifetime. The notary asked who would sign first. Ava said, I will. She took the pen and wrote her name with the steady hand of someone who has held crash carts and secrets in the same hour. The blue ink sank into the fibers. The notary lowered the seal and pressed. The sound was a clean clamp. The paper rose with a raised circle like a small hill you can run your finger over and believe in. Serena slid the post-nup forward. Ava signed. The notary stamped. The air changed by 1/2 degree. Tyler read the first paragraph and then the second. He said, "This feels like a wall." Ava said, "It is a door with rules. Use it and it opens. Push it and it locks." He looked at his parents for a version of himself that did not have to choose. None arrived. Conrad cleared his throat. He said, "Son, that she is offering a future that belongs to both of you as yourselves." He did not say more. He did not need to. Tyler looked at the clock as if the hands might point the way. The hands kept their job. He signed the post-nup with a small shake he tried to hide. The notary stamped and lifted, and the paper took its breath. Elaine's mouth shifted once and settled. Serena turned to the boundary list. She pointed to the first term. Written withdrawal. Tyler nodded without looking up. She pointed to the second. Signed post-nup. He nodded again. She pointed to the third and the fourth. No claims on the trust. No financial contact. He swallowed like a man who understands the difference between a rule and a suggestion. He signed where he was told to sign. The notary seal kissed the margin and left another small hill. The room was quiet enough to hear the pen cap click. Serena placed the consulting extension on the table for Conrad. She did not describe it as a gift. She described it as a timetable that rewards work with peace. He signed like a man grateful for a clock that does not lie. She placed the Bridgeline letter beside it. He read every word and signed with a careful hand. No celebration. The only relief that looks like discipline. Elaine asked one question that mattered. "Will this end the noise?" I said. "If you honor the paper, yes. If you do not, it will become louder in rooms you cannot decorate." She folded her hands and said, "Then we will honor it." She looked at Ava with the same expression mothers use when they realize their daughters have built their own spines. It was not love yet. It was the shape love would need to enter if it chose to. Tyler asked if the trust had always been hers. Serena said long enough to keep all of us honest. He tried to find anger and found a mirror. The mirror did not help. He looked at Ava. I heard him ask, "What do you want from me now?" She said, "Patience, discipline, and ordinary days. You respect my work and my time. You stop building ladders on other people's walls. You show up when it is not convenient. You keep your mother out of our calendar. You stop treating company news like confetti." He nodded twice and then once more for luck. The notary gathered the signed pages and aligned the edges with the brisk grace of someone who does the same hard thing for different people every hour. She placed a slip under the stack that recorded date, time, and seal number. She looked to me next. I signed where the trustee must sign to acknowledge a transition that is both legal and quiet. I handed the pen to Ava. She took it and signed the line that turned consent into architecture. The stamp lifted. The hallway doors swung open to white light. A delivery cart rolled past and the wheels made a gentle rhythm that felt like a room remembering how to breathe. Serena closed the binder and slid a copy to each side. One for counsel, one for the house that had been loud, one for the house that would remain plain on purpose. Tyler stood without scraping his chair. He said thank you in a voice that sounded new to him. He looked at Ava and said, "I will try to be the person this asks me to be." She said, "Try is a beginning. Keep going." He reached for a handshake and thought better of it. Conrad stepped close and kept a respectable distance. He said thank you to no one and to all of us. Elaine touched the back of the chair as if to leave a promise there and then folded her hands again. They left together without huddling. The hallway swallowed them in bright silence. Power is best used to make consent visible. I felt that truth settle like a tool in the right drawer. Ava exhaled once. She did not smile. She placed a fingertip on the raised circles and read the hills the way a person reads Braille when they want to be certain. She said it feels like fresh air. I said fresh air is what happens when paper does its job. She tucked her copy into the slim blue folder and held it close without clutching. Serena shook my hand and said, "Correct tempo." I said the correct team. We stepped out into the corridor. The city resumed its breath. The clock on the wall moved past noon by a quiet inch. On the table, the blue ink shone for one last second and then disappeared into the paper for good. At sunrise, my coffee did not taste like revenge. It tasted like repair. Steam rose from the mug in a straight line and held there as if the room had finally agreed to be simple. The veteran cap on the hook did not ask to be touched. It rested the way a tool rests when the work is finished and the bench is clean. I opened the kitchen drawer and found the cream envelope that had done so much heavy lifting. Empty now. I slid it to the back like a retired part and closed the drawer with the soft certainty of a latch that knows its frame. The city yawned awake outside my window. Tires whispered. A bus sighed and moved on time. I cracked the back porch door and the morning walked in without arguing. Birds took turns with the air the way decent neighbors take turns with a shovel. I sipped the coffee and listened. No sirens in my head, no speeches waiting in my throat. The house felt the way it did the day we finished building the fence Ruth had insisted on, solid with nothing to prove. I set my wallet on the table and opened it to the photo that had lived there for years. Ruth laughed into the wind that belonged to both of us. She had been my first set of steady hands. The person who taught me what we build is what holds us when we forget the plan. I looked at that picture and felt gratitude the way a man feels gravity when a ladder does not wobble. Then I took a new photo from the envelope Serena had handed me after the signing and set it beside Ruth. Ava in her ICU scrubs, hair pulled back, eyes that have seen midnight and noon and chosen to return to the room anyway. I swapped the pictures without ceremony. The protected becomes the protector. Ruth would understand. She would approve. She used to say the best proof that love worked is how it behaves in a different generation. Ava stopped by after the night shift with her stainless thermos dented at the base and a tired smile that refused to sell itself short. She leaned on the counter and watched the kettle build its small weather. She said, "You did not buy my peace. You taught me how to keep it." I said, "Boundaries are the quietest kind of love." She set the thermos down and let the sentence land without fuss. We did not talk about the trust. We did not talk about the signatures. We talked about a patient who finally slept and a resident who learned the difference between noise and alarm and how practice is mostly listening. Later, I walked to the community center where the Ruth Lantern Fund meets in a room that still smells like pencil shavings and floor wax. We are a small circle by design. No spotlights, no speeches that need a drum. A young nurse named Mateo brought a binder that had survived coffee and weather, and he held it like something alive. He spoke softly about a clinical rotation that shook him and a professor who stayed late to repair the shake with questions. He asked how a person holds fast when a room comes undone. I told him what Ruth told me. Build it steadily or do not build it. Carry what you can carry and what carries you. The rest belongs to gravity and other people's afternoons. We signed 2 scholarship letters on heavy paper with fresh blue ink. The notary at the center pressed her seal and smiled the way people smile when their work fits their spirit. The raised circles felt like small hills under the fingers of 2 students who had spent too long climbing on gravel. No numbers were read out loud. No one took a photo that would end up on a wall. We left with a light we did not have to hold high, just steady. Lantern is the right word. On my way home, I stopped by the yard where a driver named Earl was stretching a tarp over a pallet like a man tucking in a winter night. He waved without needing me to come closer. The routes were calm. The new dispatch software had learned the back roads without becoming arrogant. He called out that the Oak County Bend still lifted its fog right on schedule, and I raised a hand that said, "Good. Let some things stay old if old means true." I heard from Serena mid-afternoon, a single line, all withdrawals received. She does not use exclamation points, neither do I. I wrote back with one word, understood. She will send a short letter to close the loop and then a longer silence to keep it closed. Correct tempo, correct team. Conrad texted later and said the first week under the extension had felt like the company was catching its breath instead of panting. He did not add adjectives. He did not ask for favors. He said he had told a small story to a younger manager about a time when a truck rolled over and the man did not lose his job and how money is only noble when it lets you choose decency early. I replied with a thumb and a sentence. Keep the routes honest. He wrote "will do" and signed his name like a person who finally enjoys the size of his signature. Tyler did not call. He sent one message that read "on my way to an appointment with independent counsel," and then a second message that read "signed and filed." The short words were the right size. He asked nothing of me. He told Ava he would meet her for dinner and bring nothing but time. She told me he washed the dishes and left the counters clear and did not treat cleanliness like a favor. Some repairs do not ask for applause. They asked to be done again tomorrow. Toward evening, I took the empty cream envelope from the drawer and held it a moment. It had once been a promise and a lever and a shield. Now it was just paper. I placed it back behind the rubber bands and postcards like a retired tool that will always fit the hand but does not need to. Justice is a boundary that stays polite when you enforce it. I wrote that in my notebook and closed it without tapping the cover. No need to make noise to believe a thing. A neighbor boy rolled by on a bicycle with a seat too high for his legs, and he laughed when he wobbled and laughed again when he did not. A dog chased nothing in particular and limped a little and did not seem to mind. A woman watered plants on a balcony as if the day were already forgiven. I thought about Ruth on a Sunday, the way she would set a small plate at the edge of the table for whatever unexpected blessing might arrive hungry. "We have enough," she would say. The plate never went empty. I made a pot of soup that tasted like someone had remembered the names of simple ingredients. I left a container on the stairs for Mrs. Porter 2 doors down because she has worked late shifts longer than I have been buying coffee. I wrote a note that said, "Heat low and slow," and slid it under the lid. Then I sat on the porch until the street lights found their patience and the sky learned its darker blue. Before sleep, I opened my wallet and looked at the new order. Ava's photo in front. Ruth is behind her like a windbreak that does not demand credit. I ran my thumb along the edge where paper meets leather and thought about all the rooms a small rectangle can travel and all the days it can carry when it has the right faces inside. The house breathed like a person asleep in the chair they meant to keep. The cap on the hook did not say a word. The night did not ask for a story. I turned off the lamp and let the quiet make its own sentence. In the morning, there will be work that looks like routine and love that looks like chores and a fun that meets under a humming vent and names on heavy paper that feel the press of a notary's seal like a promise becoming textured. That is enough. When sleep found me, it did not knock. It walked in like a family that knows where the glasses are and does not need to be told. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.